coming.
Yes, and happy World Social Work Day, everyone. So our first event for the week for World Social Work Day is this event right here. We have an esteemed panel, a faculty panel, and they all have amazing experiences abroad, and we really hope that more people come and talk today.
Yeah, and just a reminder that SWIG is holding a film screening this Thursday at 5:30, and there will be Ian's Pizza there, and the film is Sleep Dealer, and it involves global themes, and afterwards we're hoping to have a panel of people who deal with the issues involved in the theme. Yeah.
Where will it be?
It will be right here.
In this room.
Yes.
You can stay here until then if you want.
Unless you have a 1:20 class.
Yeah, we're coming to that class. So we'll pass out some flyers just as a reminder about the event. So you're welcome to take one or pass them along.
Yeah. Thanks again for coming.
Great.
All right, our first faculty person is Rosemarie Carbino, who is emerita. She retired a couple years ago?
3.5.
3.5 years ago, but she has been one busy woman since she retired, as she was when she was here. So she's going to share with us some of the things that she's been doing globally.
Okay, so hello. I need to do this in 7 minutes or less. And I understand that the slides I selected are in no order that I sent them in, including some cats' pictures that I didn't send.
I got one of the cats.
So Susan is just going to move these through, and maybe you can see them all, and I'll refer to them as I can. I want to say that the work I've done around the world is in family foster care, and it's an outgrowth of the work I did as a practitioner and then teacher, instructor, field instructor here. Through local foster parent associations, regional, national, and then international. So that's collapsing a whole lot of years, starting 1986, before you were born, most likely. No? Okay. Going to my very first international meeting in Leeds, England, on a subject that I kind of discovered and found that no one else in the world was dealing with, which is the awful things that happen to foster families and their children when they are reported as abusing. And many of the reports, as you may or may not know, are not substantiated in foster care, but the agencies react, overreact, move children, all kinds of things that would not be done to biological family are done to foster family. I can't go into all of the reasons for that, but I want to say that working on this over the years has been an amazing task for me. Through the Foster Parent Association work in various countries, I've added in other kinds of talks, but that has been for a long time my major focus. And I got standing room only the first time I ever did this, with huge crowds, all wanting to know what to do about policy and so on. What I'm hoping I can do in my 6 minutes is,
There's a picture from where you were.
oh, well, this is just one of many places I've been, to Australia and New Zealand, and I wanted a photograph to show how far we were. And I took some pictures on my way home at Cook Islands. I don't know if the guys are still in there because I had to pare this down. And the next meeting I'm going to in November will be in Sydney, Australia. So foster family care is moving as a service that started in Christianized countries and Christianized areas and moving into other parts of the world. But for much of the world still, children, young children, even babies, are in institutions. So there's still a huge amount of work to do. The International Foster Care Association is working on that. Let's see.
The pictures are just rolling through, Rosemary.
Yes, and so maybe I will talk about you some in case international work interests you. These are the guys I met visiting a
I can't help it.
visiting Cook
There they are,
Islands,
they're back.
visiting found a school of social work on the island, and I went to see it. The guys were moving furniture. I asked them to pose for me, and they put their tattoos. The next is Victoria. I'll do pictures first. Victoria, British Columbia, another conference. There you can see the totem there, and one of the things you learn when you travel is how differently other nations approach their social welfare. Many of you, if you have traveled, worked in other places, you know. So this lady is part of the Canadian system of foster care services. These are Japanese foster parents at Osaka, and an adorable little child serving some candies to us at the conference. One picture of me. You're moving on?
No, it moves on.
Just a sample of things you learn to do, like sleep in a different kind of accommodation with lovely young women who took my picture and told me I was posted on Facebook. I'm personally not on Facebook, but I am. So. This is a friend from, a short story, a friend from Madison who returned to Japan, and I never heard from him again. Some 2 months before my trip to Osaka, I got an email out of the blue from this guy who said, "Hi, how are you doing? What's new?" And I thought, he is going to be amazed. Since Osaka is near Kobe where he lives, I brought him some Badger t-shirts. He's a very happy camper.
Yeah.
Want to move on? This is actually at the Victoria Conference, a wonderful foster mother from Japan who came to the conference. Yes. So you do make us. This is New Zealand. Maori custom demands that the men go in first to the program, the women follow afterwards, and then the greetings of people are by nose. This was one of my workshops, someone taken as a picture for me. I can't keep up with it. All right, the next slide. Sometimes when you do some work, I gave a talk in Madison in 2005 for one of the big conferences and got invited to Seoul, Korea. Their foster care system was 8 years old, and they wanted me to come and lecture about the United States social welfare system. I got it down to a manageable piece for them and did 4 or 5 days of lecture and conference consultation with heads of agencies. Some of those men were so stubborn about not wanting to let the children out of their institutions, which they had all very organized. But 2 years later at another conference, back up if you can, they handed me a copy of my book, which I didn't know that my lectures had been translated fully and put into a book. So these are guests from Korea and the Philippines. The next one, I don't know why I put in the hot water pools of Rotorua, New Zealand, which is, and on my day trip out of the town, I found these wardens in Raglan on a bus trip south. This is the equivalent of our neighborhood centers. And those people do everything to try to assist people the way social workers would do. So. And Maori custom is all wonderful. Maori apparently were so fierce that they were never subdued. And they have persisted with a powerful force in the country and have the legal standing, at least, of our Native American tribes, with legal protections for themselves, and are much, much more prominent in everything, in law and business and so on. So it's a nice way to look at what, how nations can be different in how they approach their First Nations people. Did we go through them all? I guess we did.
I think we've gotten through
So what I just want to show you quickly then, and it doesn't really matter, these kids on stage are children from around the world who participate in what's called Youth in Care. One of the things that the rest of the world does have and the U.S. does not is an active support for youth in foster care programs. So the kids have websites, clubhouses, newsletters, and absolutely ways to participate in research and give input to public policy, which is a wonderful, wonderful idea, rather than seeing them solely as objects of treatment. And I'll share these with you later, but kids look the same everywhere. I mean, you just cannot tell. It's a wonderful experience for them. So, I guess I want to skip all the rest of the stuff about what I've done. Every slide here has another 400 for that trip or that country. But to talk to you about the benefits to you of enlarging where you put your energies and work, because you're pretty special if you've come here and you're learning from amazing faculty and programs. So you can, in fact, really be of help sometimes in other countries, so long as you keep an open mind and don't want to just impose our way of doing things, but in fact be somewhat humble when you discover other ways of getting things done. You can learn a lot about Maori customs. When I did my review for the Osaka trip, I discovered to my amazement that foster care in Japan has diminished, and that the majority of children, teens, school-age kids, young children and infants are still in institutional settings, which they're very proud of and very happy about until we got there. I'm hoping that by example of all the workshops and so on that Japanese people went to, they began to see other more humane ways of dealing with children. You get to meet people from all over, which is a given. And you get to learn really new ideas or see them in action. I knew about youth in care, but I got to see it in action, which was lovely. So the only other thing I want to say to you is, how do you get to do this is get good in your area. Stay with it. Stay with volunteer groups. Stay with it in local associations and gradually expand. Since if you have something to say, you really do have something to say, and you will be called on. So after a while, it's an accumulated kind of expertise you can get, and it can really be of use to some people. I've been called on 2 or 3 times to consult, once to the ministry in Melbourne, because their private agencies had found some of my stuff on the web and needed someone outside to tell them the same thing that they've been trying to tell the ministry, which we were able to do, and we were able to get policy done, which was wonderful. 10 years later, of course, a new administration came in, new government, it all went down backwards again. And I don't know what pieces of what...
That sounds familiar.
Yes. Well, and you go back again. I was in New Zealand some years later, and the Australian people found me and said, you have to meet with our new health minister. She's here. She's got to hear from you, and drag me into an impromptu meeting for that person. So, as what we have all discovered, I'm sure that people would tell you the same, Once you are more than 100 miles from where you live, you become an expert.
That's true.
And the further away you are, the more expert you appear to be.
True.
So you can walk in and tell them what their consumers have been telling them for years, but now it will work. So this has been somewhat disorganized owing to my slides and me, but I'll leave this here because I'm sure I've used up my time. Thank you, and I'll be around.
Joe Dooley.
I don't have slides, but I also will be disorganized in my talk here. Okay, so last semester I took a sabbatical and I went to France, and especially to learn about French social work and social work systems there. And so the interesting thing about France, and this may not be especially about France, but schools of social work are here, and the university system is here. Okay, so never the twain shall meet. So I ended up being, and there's a long, so I will say that the way to do these kinds of things also is to network. Okay, so find somebody you know in a place and let them help you get your, whatever your plan is, get them to get people to get other people to help you. So that's how I ended up doing these things. At the school, at the university, since I was trained as a psychotherapist, social workers are not psychotherapists in France. And so I was trained as a psychotherapist, so I gave guest lectures in the Department of Clinical Psychology. Okay, so, and I'm going to tell you that all psychotherapy there is psychoanalysis. That's it. Okay, so it's not, and so social workers do not do psychoanalysis. Psychiatrists and psychologists do it. So they are the people who do psychotherapy. Okay, so, and then remember, their psychotherapy is psychoanalysis when I talk to you about other things. Okay, so like I talked about Rogers, like Carl Rogers, which is like kind of passé for us, but he's like still in there, you know, that kind of thing. Well, this was new to them, about Carl Rogers and client-centered therapy and that kind of thing, and they were sort of interested in it. And so I asked my colleague, you know, when we left, I said, "What do you think?" He said, "Well, they were kind of interested, but you didn't mention Freud, so they're not going to be as attentive." So, and that was something that was really very, very difficult for me, that everything is centered on Freudian theory and psychoanalysis. Okay? So I did that. So I did that at the university. I was a visiting professor. And then in the School of Social Work, which luckily for me was 2 blocks away, so I could just walk back and forth, I took social work courses. So I took 2 of them, and I participated in them. Those courses that they have are very short modules. So one course I took was the history of poverty in France, and that was 3 sessions of 3 hours. And then I took a course in the history of social work in France, and that was 2 sessions for 3 hours. So they're very focused. I want to tell you what it takes to get into the School of Social Work. So the first thing you have to do is you have to take a test called the concours. And so that has 4 different segments. So first is a written test that tests your scholarship and that kind of thing, and your responses to more theoretical kinds of stuff. And then there's an oral exam that follows from that, but then also they want to see how well you communicate. The third one is an individual interview with a psychologist to look at your professional self, your personality, your maturity, and to decide whether you have the traits in order to, get into the school. And then the last one is an interview with a group of people and a psychologist. And so what they're doing there is to see how well you work in groups with other people. and how well you communicate with them, how you negotiate, that kind of thing. Social workers in France usually work in équipes or teams always. So usually there are at least 3 people. And so anyway, that's why, okay? So if you get that through that, then there is 1 spot for every 20 applicants. So then there's the application procedure. So it would cost you in France maybe $800 a year to go to social work school, or maybe nothing. It would depend upon your circumstances and that kind of thing. And it's the same with the university system. So students in the university only pay like maybe $1,000, maybe less, to go to school. So there are 4 professions in social work. So social work is a broad umbrella term for these 4 different professions. So one of them, and they all have different histories and different curricula. Okay, so one of them is called an éducateur spécialisé, a specialized educator. Okay, so you can think that when I got there, well, that's not what educator is, a different discipline. Okay, so specialized educators, their history comes from the prison system. And so they evolved from are helping people to make the adjustment from prison into regular life. Okay, so they work a lot with people, integration of people into work and into the community. There's another one called monitor éducateur, a monitor educator, and that's a 2-year degree. The first one is 3-year degree. The monitor educator is a 2-year degree, and it's more like kind of assistant educator, specialized educator. And what they usually do is they work in places called foyers, which are really group homes. And so they are the people who kind of organize the day for the people who live there. Okay, and for people, like kids can be in foyers or adults. So there's a general kind of name for a group home. And then also there are éducateurs de jeunes enfants, and so there's educators of young children. A lot of times the educators of young children work in creches, and creche isn't the thing you see in Christmas. A creche is similar, if you saw it, you would think it was a daycare center, but it isn't. So I'll tell you a little bit more about creches later if I have time. Okay, and so then the 4th profession is more like that we sort of know, which is called assistant social, so a social assistant. And so they are people who, their history is derived, the history of les jeunes enfants, the educators of young children, comes from after the Second World War, and there were a lot of children who were orphaned by the war. And so they needed people to help the children develop well and find their way into the community. And then also there's the social assistants, and they're more like caseworkers. I think that's probably the biggest, so I could identify more with that that level or that profession than I could with others. Now I'm going to tell you this, if you saw them, and I did, all working, you could not tell the difference. I could not tell who was what, and I was always wrong when I tried to guess. And so I would say, what's different? How do you, and they said, c'est très subtil. It's very subtle. It's very subtle. So, okay, so I'm going back in May, so I still have to learn more about the subtle differences between these people. Okay, so one thing about the major difference, 2 minutes, 2 minutes. So one of the major things about France and the United States is our social values are so different. So here we have a lot of focus on the individual responsibility. I take care of myself, I take care of the family. And so in France, if I heard this word 10, 20 times a day, is the collective, okay? So it's the collective. So the welfare is it's not something that's begrudgingly given to people. It's the idea is everyone here needs to be doing well. And so if someone isn't doing well, then it's my responsibility to help them. So let me underline this, all social services are paid for by the government, all of them. So even if you and all of us decide to have an agency or association, that they call association, and we fit these parameters, we can petition to the government to fund us, and they would. Okay, so they have lots and lots of private associations, but even those are funded by the government. So that's because of the collective. Okay, so and also welfare. The term for like welfare or helping people is called insertion, which means integration. So it's integrated, and so we want everyone to be integrated into the collective. So, and the efforts for like helping people get jobs, it's good to have a job to survive, but also jobs help integrate you into the community. So, and it's each one of those things is just as important as the other, to be connected, integrated into the community, as well as doing something that is like for survival or taking care of yourself and your family and that kind of thing. So they're equally important. How much more? Am I done? Yes, I am. I'm done. Okay, sorry.
There is a longer, Joe did a brown bag a few weeks ago all by himself, and it's wonderful, and I believe we videotaped it, right?
It's
So if
videotaped.
you'd like to hear more, it's really worth watching. But I'm
Thank
glad
you.
we got a little bit of you here today. Are you teaching at 1:20?
I am.
Okay, so we'll have you go next, and Maurice, get up here. And Maurice, you've got to go teach too. So we'll put you two on next, and if there's time, I'll go at the end.
So I'm Dan Meyer. I'm going to start with the story. So in 2006, I was living in the UK. The government
Too disorganized.
of the United Kingdom at that time was quite aware that their child support system, which they call a child maintenance system, was a wreck. So I could talk a lot about what was wrong and why, but the important point for this story is that they knew it was a wreck and wasn't working very well and wanted to do something about it. So they invited maybe 15 academics from around Britain who did work on issues of lone parents or child support or welfare programs, and said, look, we got to do something. We're gonna have a blue ribbon commission who's going to study this and come up with some recommendations, and we want their work to be informed by research. And so we found a little money to commission some new research projects. Does anybody have any project that could be started and finished in the next 2 months? So those of you who know something about the way universities work know that that's zero, right? That can't be done. But we actually, my colleagues and I said, from the School of Social Work there in the Social Policy Research Unit, said, well, we think we could do something. So we asked for 3 months, which they gave us. And in the first month, we designed a survey and found an expert in each of 14 countries. And the second month, those experts filled in a survey form describing their child support policies and what was working and not working. And in the third month, we put all that data together and wrote a report. I actually didn't do the report, which I was quite glad of, because the first 2 parts were complicated enough. At any rate, we gathered all this data on how different countries did child support policy and whether it was working, and we've published off of it since. And the thing I'm going to talk about today, very, very briefly, is just kind of a paper that's coming out in Families, Relationships and Societies, which is a UK journal. My co-author is Christine Skinner, and I'll talk about this in just a minute. One of the points I want to make, though, is that in the US, if there's an area of policy that's not working very well, it's not on the radar screen to say, well, let's figure out how other countries do this. Let's think about international policy. No, not in the choice set. But that was one of the very first things the Brits said is maybe some other countries are doing this better. Let's see what's out there and see how it's working, and maybe we can do some stuff here. All right. So so I wanted to just talk a little tiny bit about one paper as an example of international social policy research conducted by social workers. So here's the issue in a wide variety of what I'm going to call rich countries. So this is mostly Europe, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Family transitions are very common for children. So some kids born to lone parents, some kids born to parents who are married, some kids born to parents who are cohabiting. Turns out that kids born to parents who are cohabiting, about a quarter of them across various countries will see their parents separate by the time they're 9. And the rate in the US is extraordinarily high. So cohabitations in the US don't last very long in international context. Even if you're born to married parents, a little more than 10% in most of these countries will see their parents separate. And in this if we put this category and kids born to lone parents together, once they become living with just one parent, that parent's likely to repartner within 3 years. So what we have for kids is you might start living with 2 parents, and then one parent leaves, and then another person comes in. Maybe your other parent, the one that's gone, has repartnered. So we have this constellation of people repartnering. And the question we wanted to look at is, okay, so who's supposed to provide financially for children in those kinds of situations? So you see how that's related to the question of child support. There's lots of literature that looks at something that Joe just talked about, which is this parent's job or the state's job to provide financially for children in low-income families? So there's lots of literature on that. We refer to it, but we're really interested in more, okay, so almost every place does something for the parents, and how do we divide that between mom and dad when these various transitions occur? And then in particular, the question we were trying to figure out is, what's important here? Is it biological relationships? I owe you money because you're my biological child, or is it residential relationships? I owe you money because you're a kid who lives with me. So you can see that's most clear in step-parent families. So who is responsible financially for this kid who's living with a mom and a stepdad? The stepdad or the non-resident dad? So I'm going to just give you 3 quick results. So countries do this very differently. Those of you who are paying attention might have caught that I said we did this in 14 countries, and yet the title of the paper was 12 countries. And that's because France and Belgium basically don't have any rules. They assign it all to the judiciary. So courts make decisions. Courts decide kind of whatever they want. The other 12 countries have some rules about whether it's biological relationships that define these financial obligations for children or residential. Mostly it's biology that matters, but it turns out that non-resident parents' transitions matter more in the division of these obligations than the resident parents' transition. So you might think this kid lives with their mom, a new person moves in, that person moves out, new person moves in, that person moves out. What does that do to the first dad's obligation to these kids? Well, in most countries, nothing. So that biological obligation continues despite the residential transitions. There's a little interesting part at the end in which we find that the countries where family transitions are the most likely, where instability is the highest, turn out to be the ones that are the most rigid in changing obligations. I can talk about that more if you want. But for now, I want to just say, so this team of folks wrote several papers dealing with those 12 or 14 countries, depending on how you count. I've since done some work trying to think about child support obligations in Colombia and Peru with a couple of my doctoral students. We're currently working on a project that grew out of a trip to Australia in which we're looking at the UK, US, New Zealand, and Australia. And I got interested in this very early, partly because I wanted to think about things outside my box. So I wanted to think about ways that other countries did things. And then I kind of like to travel. And so this was a way to sometimes get some people to invite me to come somewhere. And I could learn some things and talk a little, and that would all work. Thanks. I'm not going to talk about that.
Good afternoon, and I apologize for being late. I was teaching until 12:15 in the education building, so I ran over here for this presentation. So this morning I'm going to briefly speak with you about a research study that I did in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And in front of me I have an article from the Toronto Star, which you can't see, but the title is "Gay Dropouts Say Street is Only Option. Some Find Their Sexual Orientation an Additional Barrier Within Already Limited Services for Homeless." So this came out in August of 2009. And that happened to be the time when I was living in Toronto working on this project. The project emerged from research I had been doing here in the US for my PhD. Had been looking at sexual minority youth or gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender youth. And as a result, I was working on putting together my dissertation, which was looking at comparing LGBT youth compared to their heterosexual and cisgender counterparts living on the streets, and looking at perhaps their differential outcomes regarding to sexual relationships, mental health, as well as substance use. So beginning to continue that question around what might begin to explain this disparity, in addition to documenting this disparity in perhaps a new country. And so the article that I showed you referenced the fact that in Canada, which parallels or mirrors the United States, approximately 20 to 40% of youth experiencing homelessness identify as GLBT. And some people may think, why would you go to Canada? Why might this look different? And one piece was thinking about these differences, but also in the context of a policy difference. At the federal level, there is gay marriage, where it's not in the United States. This was not the case. So I wrote a grant, I received a Fulbright from Canada, US Fulbright, to conduct this study. And so in terms of how, I want to just give you some of the nuts and bolts around what this may look like. And the only person I knew in Toronto when I moved there was Dr. Aaron Schlonsky, who's at the Factor Inwintosh Faculty of Social Work at University of Toronto. And he sort of sponsored me and allowed me to have an office in his House of Child Welfare Research. Prior to receiving the Fulbright, I contacted Dr. Stephen Gates at York University, who is Canada's leading homelessness researcher. And he sort of said, yes, we see this as a documented problem. Your study seems like it'd be a major contribution and would help us have a deeper understanding. So he also had sort of institutional support and expert level support at the national level, and he gave me an office at York University. As I mentioned, as I moved to Toronto, I only knew one person, it was Aaron Schlonsky. And from the ground up, I built the study. And so essentially, some of the parts that had to go into it was going through the Institutional Review Board. I had to go through the Institutional Review Board to make sure that the study was being ethically conducted in the United States IRB as well as the REB, which is the Research Ethics Board in Canada. And one interesting note about that is I got approval from the Research Ethics Board in Canada, and I thought sort of the United States, my host institution, Washington University, would sort of approve it, thinking, Canada knows what they're doing. Interestingly enough, I got red marks back from them saying, you're going to get consent from 16-year-olds. You say the age of consent in Ontario is the age of consent they can give permission. How do you know this? And it had already gone through Ontario's REB saying, yes, the age of consent is 16. And so I just sort of sent them the website front page, age of consent. That's the idea of who has expertise and where. But that is one difference. At the age of 16, they had the right to consent as adults to participate in the study. Also, in terms of thinking about cultural buy-in, I had a clear set of research questions and measures, but in terms of how do you navigate a system whereby you are a visitor, right? And Toronto is sort of incredibly racially and ethnically diverse. Approximately 1 in 2 aren't born in Canada and are not white as well. There's a wide range of languages spoken as well. So thinking about how does that operate at the federal level, French and English are the official languages. So when talking about this, I asked questions, should I be asking about French? Should I be thinking about English since I was doing Toronto? And resoundingly, people said usually the street youth who speak French go to Montreal, that the services are much better there, and that's where we'll find out. Interestingly enough, the only person that I had to turn away from the study wanted the study conducted in Spanish. And that was not sort of a conversation that had been had around the service providers. But I did recruit 3 service agencies, Street Outreach Services, Youth Link, and Young Street Mission, which are 3 services downtown Toronto. And homeless services in Toronto are, in some ways, comprehensive, right? You know, there's universal health care, and even in fact, in terms of thinking about social welfare and public health, even as a visitor, non-citizen, when I was there, I always think about vulnerable populations and I interview homeless individuals, so I want to make sure that immunizations are up to date. As someone who worked in Ontario, as a non-citizen, I was provided with a free flu immunization, right? So that's kind of thinking about this holistic care and social welfare. And so I recruited 3 agencies. Again, I sort of did email introductions, introduced myself, what I wanted to do, and they sort of saw it as a critical need and began to get buy-in. I also gave us opportunity for them to give feedback, to see the instrument, to see the language, were there questions that they want to ask, things that would be important to them, to again get buy-in as well. And there was some issue with, I remember with one of the executives at YouthLink, I was very nervous. I thought they were going to pull the project even because she was concerned that the language was around sexual minority youth. And she thought that that was othering language, and that language was highly offensive, right? And even the IRB paperwork said these things, and we sort of had this conversation back and forth, and I said, that is how it's written up. I agree. I assure you that the youth will never see the language, that in the paperwork it won't be there. And so we did have that, but that was another question. And again, getting community buy-in, right? Like that's a part of community buy-in. Sometimes it's not a rubber stamp process. People do want to have these conversations. I also got youth buy-in to make sure that when I initially used 5 youth to do a pilot qualitatively after I did the full survey, that I asked them questions about, are there things that are important to you that you think that I'm not asking? Are there things that were confusing? What would you be interested in hearing? And subsequently I made changes as a result of, again, getting feedback. And some of it was very, very valuable. One quick example is that when you got to the family section, there were 47 questions, and one youth was First Nations, and he said, I've been in custodial care since I was 6 months old. When you're asking family, and he gave his history, he said, I don't know who you're talking about, and that was very important. So up front, demographic, who was the man or men who raised you most of your life? Who was the woman or women? So I would get a snapshot, so when I got to the family question, I could then say, now at the beginning you said you were raised by 2 dads, or you had a single mom. That's family, thinking about that. Think about this for the next 47 questions. So that's another piece of community buy-in. And in terms of thinking about, so like I said, I looked at the outcomes of mental health, substance use, sexual risk behaviors, but also in the context of families, peers, school, discrimination based on sexual orientation, the stigma of being homeless, school experiences, and see how heterosexual and cisgender youth may differ on these, and if they do have any associations with the negative outcomes. And one quick high level result, I published 3 papers off of this if you're interested in seeing more, was that in sexual minority youth, having peers who are engaging in negative behaviors actually was associated with more negative substance use, whereas that effect was not present in the heterosexual and cisgender sample. So that would be a piece of thinking about what might that intervention look like. And then in terms of looking at a cultural piece, I wanted to go out on the streets with the street outreach workers after I did my study. I didn't want to do it before because I didn't want to bias the sample and they may have seen me out, but I did go out afterward with street outreach teams because in Toronto, although it shifted, so there are strolls, like there's a transsexual strolls where people know for survival sex or prostitution. There's like a boy stroll, there are different strolls. So I actually went out on the strolls with the outreach teams to see the youth, and where they were, a lot of the youth were in my studies, and we also saw, the shift from the actual strolls to internet cafes streets. And so now it's shifting, and it may appear invisible, because where there's once a time where you could identify the strolls, often the youth are online in cyber cafes engaging in the same behavior. So that also really informs thinking about even recruitment strategy. If you go into agencies, is there an online component that needs to happen? The absence of people on the streets does not mean necessarily absence of the behavior, it's the shifting, right? And also another thing, a harm reduction strategy was used. So in addition to condoms, I went with the teams, and they also used filters for crack pipes, because the filters that people use often burns to the lungs. So we had different filters so that if engaging in substance use, at least you're not going to burn your lungs and have the damage of the lung damage as well, right? So that was a harm reduction strategy. And then something anecdotally that I found out that was not a part of my research and question, but sort of raised my eyes was, so thinking about in terms of youth coming out and being kicked out of the house, and that being one entry into homelessness. Sometimes that's an oversold story, that is a part of it. But in doing these interviews, one youth from San Antonio, he said that he came out, his parents kicked him out, and he was sex trafficked from San Antonio to Toronto. So sex trafficking, from the US to Canada was not on my radar. That was not what I was thinking about. I sort of read about it, and it seems like it's elsewhere. Often from what I read, it's not my area directly. But that really was an insight into thinking about this sex trade. And then I researched more and found out more about this. So that was another finding that was really illuminating in some ways. So those are some results, some things that I think about. And yes, I do think when engaging in work with people, really getting their buy-in, and also returning, right? So after I did my study, return, I went back to Montreal and presented the data at the International Homelessness Conference in Montreal, right? To let know, I published in the Canadian Journal of Community Mental Health. This is a Toronto sample, right? I published in the American journals as well, but really to give back to the community who would find it useful. The 3 agencies that were involved, they all got the report. They all had it still, and I said, please share with the youth, they want to read it. So that piece was important. And so just really seeing an identified need, respectfully engaging in it, respectfully proposing solutions that are sort of shared, and then making sure you return to the people that find it useful. And I think those are very, very, very important things. And like I said, thinking through cultural differences. I know sometimes we think of the US and Canada perhaps not being all that different, but in fact they are quite different. And then even cities within Canada being very different. Montreal, Toronto, the approaches have been very different. Questions have been very different. Language would have been very different. The population served would have been very different. Even cultural attitudes in Montreal are very different from cultural attitudes in Toronto. Like Toronto's the Anglo capital, Montreal's the Francophone capital. These things all, you don't go to Montreal and say, well, in Toronto, they said, that's kind of not interested, right? So with that, I will stop there, but I'm happy to answer more questions if you have any.
All right, we only have a few minutes left, but I did want to go last because some of you have heard from me before, and I don't think you had the opportunity to hear much from other people on our faculty that are doing international work. My engagement has primarily happened through my engagement with the Global Health Institute here on campus. And I've been really fortunate to get involved with them on the original committee when they were thinking about what the institute was going to be. And now I'm a Global Health affiliate. And I've had the privilege of co-leading 3 courses offered through the Global Health Institute. And the first one I went on was I co-led a trip with Dr. Cindy Hack to Uganda. And the focus of our trip there was for us to learn about HIV/AIDS in Uganda and what they're doing to respond to it. Actually, Uganda is one of the countries that has made the most progress in dealing with AIDS, and they have been very open about it. They've had a national policy. They've been able to do a lot of this because they've received aid from the U.S. in the form of, they're called PEPFAR grants, but they've made really wonderful use, and they have a very active AIDS support self-advocacy group. But anyway, that was a wonderful trip, and I think we all came back very humbled, as some of the other faculty have said, to learn what other countries are doing. The second trip I went on was to Nepal, and with this trip we had a focus on community development using a model that we talk about some of our social work classes called asset-based community development. It's a very strengths perspective. And we also were looking at community health in Nepal, which is very well advanced. They have thousands of volunteer community health workers, and we got to spend time with them. Their volunteer positions are very, very meaningful to them. They're trained for it. They get lots of support even though they're not paid, and it's made a huge impact in the country. I think in the Millennium Development Goals, they were able to reduce their rate of infant mortality more than any other country. And they originally started out with the goal of having more babies born in hospitals. That did not happen, but they reduced it anyway. And what we learned, it was through the community health workers, and they did lots of prenatal education. They gave birthing kits to families. They checked on them regularly, and it's made a huge difference. The picture on the right, the community development project that our group was involved in was building a school. And they had a school in this town, but it was constantly being washed away by flooding. So we used a technique that literally involved filling up bags like potato sacks with soil. It's called earth bags, and you can go on YouTube and see some pretty cool things that have been made with earth bags. And it's very intensive physical labor, but you need almost no equipment. You need the bags, you need dirt, you need some rocks for the foundation. But anyway, so we worked on that, and the people in the village, we all worked together. These were some little kids that were up, both working and playing with us when we were up there. The most recent trip I've been on was to Ecuador, and this is a picture in the middle. Some of you may remember Rosa Sanchez, who graduated from our program last year. She was in John's field unit, and she was amazing on this trip, and then she went on to do a field placement in Mexico, where she did some really great community organizing. But this was Rosa, and these are some of the women. We spent times in three different rural communities, all working with women who were trying to start little businesses, micro-enterprise. This particular group of women makes beautiful jewelry. We worked with some women who were making soap products, and then some other women who were making purses and bags. But it was a really great experience. Before I go here, I just wanted to say for students to keep the Global Health Institute, to Google it on campus, see what they're doing. They have so many wonderful speakers. They have trips. Tracy went to Kenya with one of their trips, and you can also, if you get started, it's kind of hard for people in our master's program because we had for such a short time, but if you're a social welfare major or a BSW student thinking about continuing, I encourage you to look at the Global Health Certificate Program. And Global Health is, they find it very broadly, and they love social work. They're always asking for more social workers, so check them out. The final thing I just wanted to share is this is a way I've engaged internationally outside of the university, and that is actually the way that I got interested in international social work. And for about 20 years, I've been involved in a project in Haiti. And it's a partnership program with the Episcopal Diocese of Milwaukee and the Episcopal Diocese of Haiti. And it's in a rural village. And we have a school and a clinic and an agriculture project. And it just really got me hooked on getting engaged globally. So there's lots of different avenues that you can go to spark an interest, to see if you're interested. I think the other panelists gave really great advice. I agree with all of it. I did bring a handout, if you want it, called How to Snag a Job in International Social Work. And how to snag one, that's putting it lightly. Because you read this and you go,
Like they're so
oh my
available.
gosh. How am I ever going to get a job in international social work? But you can go out and look for it, or sometimes it just comes and is staring you right in the face, and it can be just taking advantage of an opportunity out there. And so other times it takes great initiation and networking and going to a place you haven't been before and thinking about 6 degrees of separation and how can I find somebody who can join me in this effort. But anyway, I think all of us would say that it's been very enriching in our lives, and hopefully we've enriched some other people's lives, but we know it's enriched our lives and hopefully the lives of our students if we can share more with you. Thank you for coming.